Alright, first we're going to look at all of our pieces. We have the trunk, the branch, the leaves, and assorted Spanish moss. So the first thing we're going to have to do is take the pieces and notice all these little threads sticking out of the sides. That is because when the machine ties in and ties out, it has little loose threads that it pulls to the back of a design. It's not anything wrong with your machine or the design, it's just how the machine works. So the first thing we're going to do is trim these excess threads off, and I've already trimmed it on everything else, but you will see a few little excess threads on every single piece, so you'll want to trim those off. Alright, secondly, we're going to make one of our branches. So each branch has seven little sticks with these leaves on them, so you don't necessarily have to use all 7 if you don't want to. You could use 3, 5, whatever you feel looks right. For the video though, I'm going to use all 7. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to assemble these leaves in my hand, and after I get them all assembled, I'm going to glue them together so that I can put them in the tree branch. Right, let's get them all even-ish. I'm going to take my hot glue and just glue the bases of all these little branches together. And I'm just going to hold that until it is dry. Alright, now we are going to glue our tree branch together. So first things first, these tend to be a little stiff, so you might have to bend it into shape to loosen it up a little bit. And then I'm going to take this in my fingers and wrap it around into a cylinder shape and hold it like this. Now, you do need to try and make sure that the edges meet pretty precisely. So what I'm trying to do there is imagine my fingers are the branch, and that my fingers here represent the point we're going to glue together. We want to make sure that when they meet up like this, not like this. We're trying to make it as close to a perfect cylinder as we can so that it looks like an actual branch. So I'm going to take this, wrap it into the right shape, and I'm going to hold it like this and just put a little bit of glue on the inside here. And be careful doing this because it is fairly easy to burn yourself doing this. And once I'm here, I'm just going to use my free hand now to make sure that the edges are actually touching and in the right position. And I'm just going to hold it like that until it is dry. Alright, now that one side's dry, I'm going to do the same thing with the other side. I'm going to hold it in that position, and I'm going to drip some glue down into the branch. And again, careful not to burn yourself. And once the glue is in there, I can use both hands to hold it in the position I want it until it is dry. Okay, now that both parts of our branch are done, we can assemble them. So I'm just going to look and see which side of this is the bobbin side. So this is the bobbin side, this is the top side. I'm going to put the bobbin side in line with the seam on my branch since I want them both to be facing down. And I'm just going to slide the leaves into the branch. Now, you don't even really have to glue these in if you don't want to, since gravity is going to be on your side with this piece. But I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway just to make sure that everything stays just as it should. As for how much you should put the branches in here, all you really want to do is place them far enough into the branch that you are covering up the glue and any unsightliness that you don't want to see. I, however, don't want to put them in as far as I can, and I'll explain why in just a second. So now that I think I want them right about here, and once they're in place, I'm just going to drip some glue down from this side, enough in there to make sure that that's going to stay in there. So I'm just going to lay that down to dry, and I'm going to grab one of my completed branches. And the reason I want the sticks to be as far out as possible is so that I can fan them out more once everything's all glued in place, to make it look less dense and more like a tree, where you see the branches going in all kinds of directions. So I'm just going to fiddle with this until I think it looks good. So this is the kind of thing I'm looking for. Okay, now for our tree trunk. We have two options here. You could wrap this around and hand stitch it up and down, but I find that to be a bit too tedious. So what I'm going to do is use clips, and you might have to soften up the tree trunk too. This one's already been, we've already messed with this one and softened it up a little bit, but you will probably have to do that as well. So I'm going to line up the bottom here, and let's see, trying to get it just right. And I'm going to put a clip onto this to hold it in place, and I'm going to do the same thing on this side, because this is simply too large and too hard to hold in place just with your hand and glue it. So I've got my clips in place. So now I'm going to start here, and I'm going to put a little bit of glue along the seam in here. It doesn't have to be a huge amount, but enough to hold it. And once my glue is in place, I'm just going to hold this until it is dry. Okay, now that my glue is dry on that side, I'm going to put some glue from the other side. And what I'm trying to do here is put enough to where it's going to drip down the seam, since it's too hard to try and get the glue gun into this trunk. So putting a fairly substantial amount of glue to make sure it drips down the seam and keeps everything together nice and sturdy. And again, be a little bit careful when you're doing this, because you don't want the glue to slip through the seam and onto your fingers. Okay, now that my glue is dry, I'm just going to remove the clips, and then I'm going to try and line this up and put just a little bit of glue on the bottom where the clip was. Make sure that stays there as it should. And I'm going to put a little bit around the top too, where the clip was. Once that is finished, our log is done. Don't really need to hold this for that, since most of it's already glued. Alright, now that all of our pieces are put together, I'm going to take the tree trunk and a branch and figure out where I want this on this tree trunk. So I'm going to put the first one right about here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my hot glue, and I'm going to put some glue around the inside of this branch, and I'm going to put a decent bit of glue this time, because I want enough to where it's going to drip a little bit. So once I got my glue in there, I'm going to place this on here and hold it in the position I want it, just like this. And I'm going to press it in pretty hard to make sure it stays exactly where I want it. Now, you could have actually glued these branches to the trunk before you put it together and it was still laying flat. I chose not to, just because I wanted to be able to see exactly where all my branches were going, to make sure that I was kind of spacing them evenly rather than have to try and imagine what they'll look like once they're finished. So you are just going to hold this until it is dry, letting gravity be your ally here, and drip the glue onto the trunk so it all connects. Alright, so I put the second branch on, and if you make a mistake, I messed this one up a little bit on purpose so I could show how to fix it. If you make a mistake and it's not completely bound to the tree, you can sort of move it and open up a little crack there so that I can carefully put a little bit more glue underneath there like that. And I'm gonna stick it on and just move it to where I want the glue to drip so that gravity can help me accomplish this. And I'm just gonna hold it like this until it is dry. When you're gluing these things on, make sure that when you're holding them on, you stay very still, because if you're moving around too much, the glue might just dry in the branch rather than actually bind it to the trunk. So be a bit patient with these and be calm and still with these, because it's not that it's difficult, but it requires a little bit more patience than the rest of the tree to put together. Alright, now that our tree is all together, I have glued 7 branches onto it. There's not a specific number of branches that you're supposed to glue onto it, however many you think looks right. So now we're going to put the Spanish moss on the tree. Now, this is not a requirement, but it's optional if you like the look of it, or if your hand slips somewhere and put glue on the trunk, you could potentially use this to cover up any mistakes. So there's 3 ways I'm gonna put this on here. First is I'm going to take it and put it from the top like this. Unfortunately, it's not just going to stay there and behave though. So what I'm going to do to make that stay is I'm going to put a very small amount of glue right around here. Not much though, just because I don't want my glue to show through the moss, since it's not actually solid. Right, and I'm going to put a little bit of glue in here where I'm going to drape the moss into the trunk as well. That should dry pretty fast. So now my moss is going to stay where it belongs. The second way I might do this is drape it over one of the branches like that, so it hangs down over the branch. But again, it's not just going to stay there of its own volition, so I have to put a little bit, very small amount of glue around the branch so that when I put this on here, it stays. Let me just hold that in position for a moment. Alright, so now you can see it's going to stay where I want it. And the last way I might decorate this is thread it underneath take one of our little leafy branches and thread it underneath there with the intention to have it hang from here. And in order to get it to stay like that, I'm not going to try and glue it to this small branch. I'm going to put a tiny dab of glue here and pinch it together like this so that it stays where I want it, so that when you look at it from the side, it's hanging like this. And I'm just going to take however much moss I want and decorate the tree like that. If you can think of some more ways you can attach it to this tree, well then, that should work too. There's no specific instructions for how to decorate this, just however you think looks good. Alright, now that all of our moss is in place, and however much or little of this you think looks right is just fine. So, if you staggered the branches around mostly evenly, you can simply place this down wherever you want and it'll just stay there. There's no need to permanently attach it to anything. If you do want to permanently attach it to anything, you can do so in the same way you attach the branches to the trunk. You just take your glue all around the edges inside where you're not going to see it, and just stick it down on something. Given that the trunk is also fairly large, if you'd prefer, you could also just drip glue straight down the center and attach it to whatever you're using it to decorate, like that, and that would work just fine. Alright, next we have the piece for the log. Now, this isn't an essential piece for making the tree. In fact, if you don't want this, you don't really need to have it at all, or maybe this is the only thing you want and you don't actually want the tree. Either way, if you choose to make this, you're going to be doing this in the exact same way you put the tree trunk together. You're just going to put it in place. And you can see it doesn't actually match up quite perfectly here because it's meant to be a little more chaotic. But you can still clip it just fine. And you do the exact same thing. You would drip glue down the center on both sides and around the edges where the clips were, and you'd be done with this. And you could just leave it like that if you want, or you could put one or two branches on it to complete it. Maybe you'd even want to stitch the leaves out in a brown or tan color so they look dead, since it's a fallen log. But either way, this is just an option if you so choose to make it. Okay, now just as an extra bonus, we're going to take these extra leaves and we're going to make something out of them. So I'm going to make a shrub out of these leaves. But since I'm not going to be putting this in a branch, there's nothing to hide the glue. So I'm not actually going to glue this time. I'm going to take some thread and see if I can get the camera to focus here. I'm going to take my thread. I'm going to wrap these together with the same color thread I used to make them. Then, as I go, I'm just going to start adding more of them into the mix until I've used up all my extra branches here. Alright, got all my branches in the mix. Now I'm just going to wrap this up so it looks like a single little tree trunk, stem, whatever you want to call this. Alright, I'm going to clip that. I'm going to find the other end wherever it has ended up. Here we go. And I'm going to try and tie the ends together, which is a little difficult with something as small as thread, but it works. See if I can get this. There we go. Give myself a few more knots, make sure that's not going anywhere, and then I'll and then I'll trim the excess. All right, that's good enough. All right, now I have this little shrub. So whatever I make with this, I could take a very small amount of glue and place it at the base, not enough so that it's obvious, but very small amount, and then stick that to whatever I want. So that's an option if you want to make little shrubs to go along with the tree.